Elijah Cole walked into the glittering heart of Manhattan's most opulent charity gala, the air crisp with perfume, wealth, and carefully practiced smiles. But his presence was ice-calculated, emotionless, and powerful. His tailored suit clung to his tall frame like armor, blue eyes scanning the room not for pleasure, but for profit, for power, for purpose. It had been years since he let anything pierce his perfectly constructed world, and tonight was meant to be no different. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. As the crystal chandelier cast golden shards of light over marble floors, his breath caught Paralyzed not by fear, but by memory. Across the sea of glittering gowns and hollow laughter stood a woman time had failed to erase. Savannah Ray. Her name struck him like lightning in a clear sky, and suddenly the noise vanished. In a room full of elite strangers, her presence screamed louder than any auctioneer's voice. Her hair, soft waves of golden brown, framed a face Elijah had memorized in dreams, then spent years trying to forget. She wore a simple white dress, not designer, not extravagant, just Herson at the hem. Faint smudges of paint told a story far deeper than the diamonds around her. And in that moment, Elijah wasn't a billionaire. He was a man haunted by the woman who disappeared without goodbye, who took his heart and vanished like smoke in a storm. The floor beneath him felt unsteady. His jaw tightened, his fists clenched. Because Savannah was supposed to be gone, lost to the lies that tore them apart, the betrayal that burned like wildfire. She wasn't meant to be standing 20 feet away, more radiant than memory ever allowed. But it wasn't just her presence that unraveled him, it was the boy beside her. Small, delicate, but with blue eyes that mirrored Elijah's so precisely, it felt like staring into a forgotten photograph. The child held Savannah's hand, tugging playfully, unaware that the man staring at them wasn't just a guest, was a ghost from the past returning uninvited. Elijah's heart thundered like war drums. Time collapsed in on itself, memories flooding his mind, Savannah painting on his rooftop at midnight, her laughter echoing through campus halls, their whispered promises beneath starry skies, all shattered by a single lie, a forged letter, a cruel manipulation. He had searched for her when she left, begged for answers, fought shadows, and mourned a woman who vanished, as if their love meant nothing. But now, here she stood, breathing the same air, looking into his eyes with a calmness that masked 1,000 storms. The silence between them grew louder than the jazz band playing nearby. Elijah wanted to scream, to demand answers, to pull her aside and ask why she left, why she never called, why she looked at him now like he was a stranger, instead of the man she once said she couldn't live without. But all he could do was stand there, frozen, as the gala carried on waiters with champagne trays swirling like ghosts, cameras flashing like memories trying to be seen. And Savannah, ever graceful, ever distant, turned slightly, speaking to the boy, his son. Could it be? No one else in that room noticed Elijah's world collapsing in slow motion. The pain in his chest wasn't new, but this time it had a face. A child's face. A child that should have been his to raise, to guide, to protect. Questions clawed at his mind like wildfire. Did she know? Did she keep him a secret on purpose? Was this her way of punishing him for a betrayal he never committed? Some wounds don't bleed, they whisper until the silence becomes unbearable. And this silence screamed louder than betrayal. Elijah stepped forward, but his legs felt like stone. His world, once ruled by logic and finance, was suddenly ruled by heartbeats and heartbreak. He had survived takeovers, scandals, and economic crashes, but nothing prepared him for the sight of Savannah, her gaze unreadable, her lips trembling like she had something to say and no right time to say it. 7 years of pain, longing, and unanswered prayers coiled in his throat like a storm waiting to break. His heart knew this wasn't just a reunion, it was the beginning of something far deeper, more dangerous. He wasn't ready for this encounter. But maybe, just maybe, the truth was, Elijah couldn't move. His feet remained rooted to the gala floor, but his heart had already wandered into the past, back to the days before silence had a name, when Savannah Ray was the girl who colored the edges of his gray world, with her fierce love and laughter. It all began on the ivy-draped campus of Amherst, where Elijah, the heir to Cole Real Estate Holdings, first noticed her not at a party or in a lecture hall, but sketching strangers on park benches, lost in her own world. She was art in motion, a whirlwind of creativity, barefoot in the grass, reading poetry to squirrels, and humming forgotten jazz tunes. Elijah, with his monogram cufflinks and pressed ambition, should have never fit into her life. But somehow, she made room. Their differences weren't cracks, they were windows. While his world was built on blueprints and bottom lines, hers was shaped by dreams and color-stained fingers. They fell in love like two stars, colliding bright, intense, and tragically short-lived. He remembered holding her hand during finals week as she whispered, "You're more than the empire they expect you to build." And for the first time, he believed he could be. But back in their world, love was currency and Savannah didn't come from wealth. That was enough for Vivian Cole, Elijah's icy stepmother, to sharpen her claws. Vivian had always worn grief like diamonds, using Elijah's late father's name to manipulate boardrooms and bloodlines. She saw Savannah not as a girl in love with her stepson, but as a threat to the dynasty she controlled like a puppet master. Elijah never knew the whispers she planted in Savannah's ear poison disguised as protection. One morning, Savannah received a letter on Cole and company stationery, allegedly from Elijah, coldly stating he was being transferred to Europe and had chosen his career over their relationship. He would send financial support for her to move on comfortably. Her hands trembled. The words weren't just devastating, they were cruel. What she didn't know was that Elijah never wrote them. While she cried into her pillow, he was boarding a jet to Paris, sent by Vivian under the pretense of urgent business. She intercepted every message Savannah tried to send. Emails bounced back. Phone calls were blocked. The distance turned fatal. When Elijah returned a month later, flowers in hand, eager to propose, her dorm was empty. The art studio they once painted in was abandoned. No forwarding address, no answers, just a void. In desperation, he turned to Vivian only to hear the knife-edged lie that broke him. "She took your love and sold it to another man. Consider yourself lucky." That lie was a slow-burning fire. It consumed his trust, hardened his heart, and buried his hope beneath concrete ambition. And for Savannah, the pain bled deeper. She believed Elijah had discarded her, like a phase proof that money always had the last word. She walked away with shattered dignity, hiding her tears behind a canvas, carrying a child he never knew he gave her. The years rolled by like cruel reminders, and both lived half-livtures full of sacrifice, his full of silence. And now, with just one glance across a gala hall, that buried truth had clawed its way to the surface like a ghost demanding justice. Elijah clenched his jaw, staring through crystal flutes and ballroom gowns, not at Savannah, but at the web of betrayal that had stolen his future. His mind was no longer in Manhattan. It was back in dorm rooms filled with laughter, rooftops they danced on in the rain, promises made in whispers under wool blankets. Vivian hadn't just sabotaged a relationship, she had detonated a love that could have withstood the world. And Elijah? He had spent the last 7 years rebuilding a castle on sand, never knowing the foundation was a lie. Golden phrase, "It's not the goodbye that breaks you, it's the lie that convinces you they never cared." And now, face to face with the woman he never stopped loving, the silence between them wasn't empty, it was echoing with everything that was stolen. The truth was still a shadow, but Elijah could feel it pressing on his chest like an invisible weight, suffocating and undeniable. As his eyes followed Savannah weaving gently through the gala crowd, her hand wrapped around the tiny fingers of the boy beside her. Giuliani had heard the name whispered by a hostess moments earlier, but names meant nothing compared to the unshakable familiarity of that child's gaze. Elijah's heart, once fortified by silence and steel, began to tremble in the grip of something raw and terrifying. He followed them first with caution, then with desperation, his polished shoes echoing on the marble like thunder in a cathedral. He didn't call out, he didn't demand, he only watched. Savannah stopped briefly at an art booth, where Julian's painting, a swirl of gold and midnight blue, was being admired by wealthy patrons. The boy, with his tousled light brown hair and those unmistakable blue eyes, spoke with such gentle confidence it made Elijah ache. It wasn't just the way he smiled, it was how he stood, hands in his pockets, just like Elijah always did. His brow furrowed slightly in deep thought, like he carried the weight of wonder on his small shoulders. Elijah could see his own reflection in miniature. The more he stared, the more undeniable it became. That boy was his. A silent scream erupted inside him as he turned away briefly, unable to breathe under the avalanche of realization. When Savannah stepped aside to greet an old acquaintance, Elijah moved behind a marble pillar, ears burning, heart racing, just in time to overhear her whisper to a woman with kind eyes and paint-smudged fingernails, "Your best friend," he assumed. "He saw us," Savannah murmured, her voice trembling, her fingers clenching the stem of her glass. He looked right at Julian. "I saw it in his eyes, she knows." The friend exhaled, quiet but firm. "Maybe it's time, Sav. Maybe it's time," he knew. Savannah's silence was an answer soaked in fear and regret. I wanted to protect Julian from pain, from rejection, from a world that worships money more than love. I thought Elijah chose power over me, over us. Her voice cracked like an old violin string. He left, and Vivian made sure I believed it was intentional. I couldn't stay. I couldn't let my son be raised in a world that thought we weren't enough. Elijah staggered back, as if the words physically struck him. Every second he thought she'd abandoned him was now poisoned with the truth that she had been left to walk through fire alone, carrying his legacy, his son, without his name or presence. He turned the corner and met her gaze, his voice low, broken. He's mine. She didn't deny it. She didn't cry. She just nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears, and that was all the confession he needed. You let me miss 6 birthdays, Elijah whispered, pain cracking every syllable. 6 nights of stories I never read. 6 mornings of pancakes I never flipped. You stole his first words, his first steps, and 2 wasn't there when he scraped his knee or got scared of the thunder. Savannah folded her arms across her chest, shielding her heart as much as his anger. I thought you didn't want us. I believed the letter. I thought you made your choice. Elijah's voice trembled like a confession in a church. I didn't choose money. I was tricked, and I came back to an empty world. Julian appeared in the distance, waving excitedly toward them. His innocence shimmered like sunlight on glass, unaware of the storm he stood in the middle of. Elijah watched him and felt something he hadn't in years, not just longing, but grief. Grief for memories that never existed. He could have been the one to carry Julian on his shoulders. He could have been the one to teach him how to ride a bike, to tie a tie, to hold his heart steady through the chaos of life. But he hadn't even known the boy existed. And now, here he stood, a stranger to the one person who carried his blood. Savannah touched his sleeve gently, her voice a whisper of thunder. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it to protect him from being another piece in your family's game. Elijah blinked back the sting in his eyes. A father's arms should be the first place a child runs to, not a truth they learn in shadows. The weight of that truth cracked something inside her. She nodded again, more slowly this time. I'm sorry. I can't change what I did, but I can tell him if you want me to. Elijah looked out at Julian, who had now crouched to pick up a dropped paintbrush, then looked back at Savannah with a voice forged from grief and love and shattered time. No, I'll tell him. He deserves to hear it from me. And in that moment, the millionaire stopped being a businessman and became something far more fragile, a father facing the ghost of a life he never lived. Elijah stood beneath the painted glass skylight of his mansion's foyer, hands buried in his pockets, trying to steady the whirlwind inside him as Savannah and Julian crossed the threshold of the life they were never meant to be excluded from. The towering estate, once cold and cavernous, seemed to pulse with a strange kind of hope, as if the walls themselves remembered her laughter, her footsteps, her quiet dreams etched into forgotten corners. Julian's small voice filled the silence, first curious questions about the spiral staircase, the grand piano, the tall portraits, and the library with the secret nook Elijah once carved out just for reading nights that never happened. Savannah, hesitant but dignified, held her son's hand as she stepped inside a world she had once imagined growing old and before lies had stolen everything. Elijah had invited them under the pretense of convenience, offering his home during Julian's upcoming surgery, a minor procedure that weighed on the boy far less than it did on the adults orbiting him. Savannah resisted at first, reluctant to enter the house that once belonged to the version of Elijah who shattered her world. But Julian's heart, pure and unfiltered, looked up at her and said, he feels like someone who'll stay. And that was enough. Elijah gave them the West Wing, a warm space once designed with family in mind, a space that had collected dust instead of memories. In those first few nights, Savannah wandered the halls like a ghost retracing her past, her fingertips grazing the walnut banisters, her eyes lingering on rooms she once dreamed of filling with lullabies and late-night whispers. She found her old art tucked away in a guest room closet, charcoal sketches of Elijah in quiet moments, back when love was louder than betrayal. She sat at the window seat one morning and whispered to herself, I was never supposed to be just a memory in this house. Meanwhile, Julian bloomed like spring in Elijah's presence. The two built model airplanes, played piano duets, and read storybooks until Julian drifted to sleep beside the man he didn't yet know was his father, but whom he already trusted like one. Yet not all shadows stay quiet. One afternoon, as sunlight stretched long across the marble floor, Vivian Cole returned. She arrived without announcement, her heels striking the ground like gunshots, her presence reeking of control and entitlement. Her eyes locked onto Savannah with disdain so sharp it could have drawn blood. You're here, she sneered, a cruel smile curving her lips. How poetic, crawling back into the life you were never meant to touch. Savannah stood still, calm, regal. I didn't crawl, she replied. I walked in because my son deserves to know his father. Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice like venom. How much will it take for you to disappear again? Name your price, Savannah. I'll wire it tonight. Savannah looked her dead in the eyes and said, without a tremble, you don't have enough zeros for that anymore. The woman who once ran from lies now stood like steel wrapped in grace. Vivian, flustered by the lack of fear, stormed out, but her shadow lingered. Later that evening, Landon Price, Elijah's lifelong friend and secret keeper, cornered him in the study. The room smelled of old leather and fading trust. Landon's words cut more than comforted. I know you think bringing her back here fixes something, he said, voice low. But some wounds don't heal with apologies. And some hearts cracked never trust again. Elijah studied him carefully. You loved her too, didn't you? Landon hesitated, then nodded once. But I never stood a chance. She only looked at me when you weren't in the room. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was honest. That night, Elijah stood outside Savannah's guest room door, hand raised to knock, heart heavy with questions he wasn't ready to ask. But he turned away, not out of fear but out of respect. Savannah sat inside, brushing Julian's hair as he slept, whispering stories she used to tell herself when loneliness threatened to devour her. And in that moment, she realized she wasn't here to rekindle something. She was here to reclaim herself. Golden phrase, she didn't come back for revenge, came back with the strength to not run anymore. And in the silence of that mansion, a woman who had once been broken now stood whole. And a man who had once been lost was beginning to see the outlines of the life he was never supposed to let go. The night air was soft, almost shy, wrapping itself around the city like a secret waiting to be told. As Elijah led Savannah up the narrow spiral staircase tucked behind the east wing of his mansion, a staircase only he had ever used, she followed without questions, her bare feet brushing against cool stone steps, heart thudding with a nervous rhythm she hadn't felt in years. At the top, the door creaked open into a world frozen in Timea private rooftop garden, bathed in warm golden lights shaped like stars, strung above their heads like constellations of unfinished dreams. Savannah's breath caught as she stepped onto the wooden deck, surrounded by easels with half-finished paintings, each one bearing traces of a past they had once dreamed together. The air smelled of fresh lavender and old memories. And somewhere in the distance, soft jazz floated up from a street musician below, echoing off the skyline like a love letter with no stamp. You built this? She whispered, eyes wide, voice fragile. Elijah nodded slowly, his expression raw. For you, he said. After you left, or I thought you left, I needed to believe somewhere still remembered us. He motioned to a canvas in the corner, an unfinished portrait of her, sketched from memory. Her eyes in the painting held the same sadness he saw now. Savannah stepped closer, her fingertips brushing the dried edge of the paint, and her voice broke. Why did you wait so long to tell me this? Elijah swallowed hard, walking to her with hesitant footsteps, like every step might crack the moment in half. Because I was waiting to become the man who deserved to say it out loud. His voice dropped to a whisper. I searched the world for peace, Savannah. But you were the silence I always needed. His hand reached for hers, not with dominance, but with fear trembling like he was asking permission to breathe again. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let his fingers wrap around hers like ivy climbing home. They stood still, face to face, hearts fluttering in a rhythm older than regret. And then, forehead to forehead, they leaned into the stillness between them, a tear slipping from her eye, cutting a line of light across her cheek. No one spoke. The world didn't need sound in that moment. The music below changed tempo, and Elijah gently pulled her into a slow dance-no, the kind that needs rhythm, but the kind that listens to breath, to pauses, to the things that were never said. They moved together beneath the stars he had once hung in her memory, surrounded by fragments of a love that somehow survived abandonment, deception, and time. Their bodies swayed, not for passion, but for healing, their embrace a bridge over all the moments they missed. And in that fragile space, where pain could have taken over, they chose presence instead. There was no kiss, no need for one. Instead, he wrapped his arms around her slowly, fully, as if gathering every piece of her that had ever been broken. She pressed her face into his chest, listening to the steady drum of the heart that never stopped calling her name. The hug was long, silent, and sacred. It wasn't about falling in love again. It was about finding the courage to believe they had never truly stopped. In that stillness, she finally let go of the years she carried alone. And he, for the first time, Felt like home wasn't a place, it was a woman who never stopped living inside his every regret. Golden phrase. Sometimes, the most intimate thing isn't a kiss, it's holding someone like they're the only truth you ever believed. And that night, under star-shaped lights and unfinished dreams, they remembered not who they used to be, but who they still were when all the lies had been stripped away. The night after the rooftop embrace, the mansion lay cloaked in the kind of silence that follows vulnerability, fragile, sacred, and still breathing with possibility. Elijah sat alone in his study, staring at the rooftop through rain-blurred windows, fingers brushing against the faint imprint of her hug on his chest. Something had shifted inside him, a thawing of grief, a reawakening of love, but peace never stays long when darkness still has unfinished business. The following morning, as golden sunlight tried to climb through the glass like hope clawing its way in, Vivian Cole returned with venom in her voice and desperation in her smile. She found Elijah in the drawing room, seated beside the fireplace, eyes still heavy with last night's quiet longing. She didn't wait for permission to speak. "Before you ruin your life again for that woman," she said, "there's something you deserve to know." Elijah didn't flinch, but his body tensed like a piano wire being pulled. "Savannah's father," she continued, eyes narrowing, "wasn't just some poor man from a small town. He was the man who destroyed your father." Elijah turned slowly, disbelief flickering across his features. "What are you talking about?" Vivian slid a folder across the table. "Old documents, clipped articles, cryptic letters. He was your father's fiercest rival, the man who launched a smear campaign that led to an investigation, a heart attack, and his death. Look it up, Elijah. Her family buried ours." The words were a dagger dipped in poison. Elijah stood, the floor shifting beneath his feet. A storm had erupted inside his chest. Suddenly, the woman he had just held like a lifeline was now tethered to the tragedy that had defined his childhood. The pain of losing his father, the confusion of unanswered questions, the loneliness that had raised him more than any guardianate, all returned like a bruise being pressed. Vivian left him in that silence, knowing the damage had been done. Elijah didn't speak to anyone for hours. He didn't answer Savannah's soft knock at his door. He didn't respond to Julian's giggles in the hallway. Instead, he buried himself in old records, trying to verify the truth. But sometimes, lies were the face of facts, and Elijah, wounded and unsteady, couldn't tell the difference. That evening, when Savannah found him in the garden, he couldn't meet her gaze. She looked radiant, nervous, hopeful, and unaware of the hurricane waiting in his silence. "Did something happen?" she asked gently, sensing the distance. Elijah exhaled, each word forced through his clenched throat. "Was your father involved in my father's death?" Her breath caught. The air turned colder. "What?" He finally looked at her, eyes not with anger but with confusion, betrayal, hurt. "Vivian said your family ruined mine, that your father's lies led to everything, to his heart attack, to his grave." Savannah didn't cry, she didn't scream, she didn't even rush to defend herself. She simply stood there, shaking slightly, and said the only words that kept her dignity intact. "I won't beg you to believe me, but I'll never lie to you again." Elijah's world fractured in that moment, not because he believed Vivian completely, but because doubt had already built its home in his mind. And once doubt enters love, it infects every corner of it. He turned away, and in doing so, unknowingly turned away from the one person who had never betrayed him. Savannah returned to her guest room that night, packed Julian's small bag, and sat in the chair by the window, staring at the stars they once danced beneath. She whispered stories to Julian, but her heart was silent. The next morning, Elijah stood in his father's old office, desperate for clarity, and began digging through archive files, letters, reports, anything that would explain what really happened. And what he found shattered every illusion. The campaign against his father hadn't been launched by Savannah's family, had been orchestrated by someone far closer. Hidden letters, sealed transcripts, and lawyer notes revealed that Vivian had forged anonymous tips to reporters, triggered the investigation herself, and fed lies to both parties to ignite a feud she could benefit from. She had used Savannah's father as a scapegoat. She had covered her tracks behind manipulated stories and legal distractions. Elijah dropped the last folder and staggered backward, grief roaring in his ears louder than truth. Vivian hadn't just tried to control his life, she had destroyed it to gain it. The father he had mourned, the woman he had doubted, the years he had wasted, all collateral in her war for power. He drove to the guest wing in seconds, heart pounding, only to find the room empty. Savannah and Julian were gone. On the bed sat a note, simple and final. "You believed her again. I hope someday you believe in us instead." Elijah dropped to his knees, the letter shaking in his hand. Regret wrapped itself around his throat like a noose. He had pushed away the one truth that had never wavered. Her love, the mansion once filled with fragile hope, echoed only with footsteps of mistakes. And now, Elijah Kolethman, who built empires, realized he had lost the only home that ever mattered. Golden phrase: when truth finally walks in, it doesn't knock. It breaks down the door of every lie you once called home. And this truth hadn't just walked in, it had kicked down every door, burned every lie, and left behind the ashes of the love he may never deserve again. Elijah didn't sleep the night. Savannah and Julian left to pace his estate like a man haunted, his guilt echoing through marble halls that once whispered hope. Her note burned in his pocket as if each word etched itself deeper into his skin, and with every second, he realized that clarity meant nothing without action. At sunrise, he gathered only the essentials: no assistants, no drivers, no entourage, just the ache in his chest and the memory of a woman who once held his broken world together. It took 2 days, endless calls, and tracking receipts to learn she'd fled to a quiet beach town where the sky bled colors no city ever could. The drive there was soaked in rain, windshield wipers chasing his regret, thunder rolling like judgment across the highway. When he arrived, soaked to the bone, the storm breaking against his shoulders like consequence, he saw her under a striped canopy near the dunes, surrounded by easels and children, smudging their fingers with bright paints. Julian giggled nearby, digging into the sand, building a crooked castle that leaned toward the sea. Elijah's breath caught, his knees buckled, not from exhaustion, but from the overwhelming surge of relief that they were real, alive, still within reach. He stepped forward, every footfall heavy with history, and Savannah turned slowly, her eyes widening as if the sky had sent him back. He didn't speak right away. He simply knelt in the wet sand before her, rain dripping from his lashes, hands trembling, voice cracking as he finally released the truth that had lived in him all along. "This heartbeat of mine," he whispered, placing her hand against his chest. "It never stopped whispering your name. Let's finish what we started. As a family." Her lips parted, and for a moment, she said nothing, only let the rain wash over them, mixing tears with sea salt and sky. Then she reached for him, arms pulling him into her like forgiveness had a shape. "We never stopped being one," she breathed, her voice breaking against his neck. Julian looked up, confused at first, then smiling as he ran toward them and wrapped his small arms around both. It was messy and wet and Rowan perfect. Days later, they returned to New York, not to reclaim what was lost, but to rebuild what was always theirs. Vivian was arrested soon after, her secrets unraveling faster than her power. Fraud, manipulation, and obstruction all laid bare. Elijah faced her once, only once, and said, "You taught me how to build empires, Vivian, but Savannah taught me how to build a home." He cut ties clean, not with rage, but with resolve. The mansion, once soaked in silence, now echoed with Julian's laughter, with the hum of Savannah's brushes sweeping across fresh canvas, with the music of late-night dancing in socks and pajamas. The rooftop was no longer a shrine of loss, it became a haven of color and peace. Elijah and Savannah didn't rush to redefine themselves, they just lived, fully, openly, without secrets. Some nights, Elijah would hold her close and whisper apologies he didn't need to say, and Savannah would kiss his hand and say, "I already forgave the man you were because I love the man you became." And Julian, he thrived. His paintings won school awards, and every night he made them sit for 10 minutes of family silly time. They healed in layers, slow, honest, and real. And as the seasons turned, the mansion transformed into something sacred, no longer made of stone and glass, but of trust, second chances, and love reborn. Golden phrase: in the end, love doesn't return for revenge. It returns because even broken hearts still beat when they're meant to. And there's those once broken hearts now beat in rhythm, not because the past was perfect, but because the future finally had room to breathe.